Hello and welcome to Learning Without Tears Ask an OT. My name is Suzanne Asherson and I am an occupational therapist. Today we are going to talk all about self-dressing skills, adaptations for WetDry Try for those of you who don't like chalk, and all about hand dominance. We recently received a question asking for help with self-dressing skills. The question reads, when do kids learn to dress themselves? My child needs help with using buttons and zippers, and I would appreciate any help to make morning dress routine less of a struggle. Man, do I understand that. Hurry up, button up your shirt. Did you put your shoes on yet? Don't forget to zip your sweatshirt. We're running late. Hurry up. Can you do it quickly? Those are words that I have uttered many times at my house with my child. Do they sound familiar to you? Probably, because as most caregivers, we are always stressed out for time to get our children dressed and ready and out the door to get to school. Well, today, let's talk about dressing skills. When helping a child learn to dress, it's important that we give the child ample opportunities for practice. We give them helpful instruction and tips, and we have appropriate expectations. Why is dressing so tricky for a child? Well, it's because it encompasses many different underlying skills, such as fine motor skills, strength, coordination, bilateral motor coordination using both sides of the body, spatial awareness, sequencing, problem-solving skills, core strength, body awareness, and so much more. It takes many years for a child to master the skill of getting dressed on their own. And we hope that by the time the child is kindergarten age, they are going to be able to help you out with that crazy morning routine. So let's talk about the developmental sequence approach for milestones for dressing. So within the child's first year, when they're 1 year old, that child should be able to extend their arms and their legs to help you with dressing. You'll also see that child will be able to remove their socks and put on and take off a hat. At around 2 years old, that child will be able to remove their shoes as well as help push down their pants. At 2.5 years old, that's when the child will begin to attempt to try to put on their socks. They'll try to unbutton a large button, and they'll be able to put on and take off easy clothing like jackets. At around 3 years old, that child will be able to put on a t-shirt, they'll put on their shoes, but most likely on the wrong feet. They'll try to put on their socks, but without orientation for the correct heel location. A 3-year-old should be able to pull down simple clothing, button large buttons, and when that zipper is connected at the bottom, they should be able to zip up and zip down. At about 3.5 years old, that's when that child can zip up and zip down and separate that zipper when unzipping. They should be able to button about 3 to 4 buttons, unbuckle a belt with practice, and be able to find the front of their clothes. At around 4 years old, a child should be able to zip on their own and unzip on their own, getting the connector in place, put their socks on independently, put on and remove their own t-shirts. At about 5 years old, when that child's ready for kindergarten, that's when we hope that, for the most part, that child is going to be able to be dressing themselves independently. Of course, if you're giving tricky fasteners, that will make it harder. And at around 6 years old or even later, that's when shoelace tying will begin, as well as using trickier fasteners. So let's talk about Suzanne's OT tips to help a child with self-dressing. First of all, it's really important that you give that child ample time to practice. So in my house, that does not mean that we try practicing to get dressed during that hurry up, crazy morning routine, but rather we try later on in the day when we're not in as much of a rush. Another great tip is to teach the last step first. So if you're helping a child to put on their shirt, allow that child to pull their shirt down under their belly so that at the very end, that child can exclaim, "I did it," right? And that's building up their self-esteem and I can do it mentality for self-dressing. When it's time for the child to put on their underwear or their pants, sitting down is always going to be easier than standing up because you're not working on balancing. When it's time to help a child to put their clothing on the correct way, have them locate the tag of the clothing. And with that tag, put it down face down first, and that will help the child to be able to get dressed with their clothing facing the right way. Now, when it comes to helping a child with things like socks, have the child put their fingers through the sock first, and they're going to put their thumbs up and then put their fingers in, and they're going to scrunch their socks and then put their foot inside. What are some other simple hacks for you? Well, let me tell you, my favorite is Velcro. Even to this day, I prefer my 8-year-old to be using Velcro. Why? Because as a school-based OT, one of my nightmares was always going to the playground during recess and seeing children who know how to tie their shoes have their shoelaces untied because all they want to do is play during their quick recess. So Velcro makes it easy. Another great hack is using elastic pants, all right, especially when you're training a child for potty training, because it's easy for them to pull it up and down instead of tricky buttons and zippers for jeans. Matman, he's one of my absolute favorites. Why do I love Matman so much? Well, besides the child being able to learn about body parts and positions, we can dress Matman. We can give Matman different types of clothing, right? Matman could put on a shirt with buttons. Matman can, if it's cold, have a hoodie or a jacket. And so it's always easiest for the child to practice zipping and unzipping when it's off of their body, when it is on Matman, rather than on their body. You could use things like this. This is just a buttoning board, and you could use this to dress Matman to practice buttons. When practicing buttons, what I like children to do is to practice from the bottom and then go up, because that way they can see what they're doing and it helps with the alignment. And when it's time to button, it's always easier for the child to unbutton first than button. It's important to have children use their pincher fingers to pinch, to pinch the button, and then to push it through to open it up. And likewise, pinch the button, push it through, pinch, and pull. And that will help the child to be able to button their buttons. Now, Learning Without Tears have some other really great opportunities to work on self-care dressing skills. We have our tag bags. And with our tag bags, children are practicing self-care, like buttoning. We have snaps, Velcro, zippers, and even fasteners. So again, practicing off of your body is easier than when practicing on your body. A fun way to work on dressing skills is during dress-up time. Children can pretend that they're princesses. They could dress up as firefighters, and with their firefighter vest, they could practice all the different types of fasteners during dress-up time. And then lastly, quickly, let's talk about shoelaces. Shoelaces are really hard to teach children. I like to teach children the method with two bunny ears. I find that that's easier. I also like to teach children using a shoelace that is two different colors. And you could easily adapt shoelaces at home by taking a white shoelace and just coloring it with a Sharpie so that the shoelaces is half one color and then half the other. It makes it easier because when the child is doing the actual lacing, they can see the differences. And when it's time for the child to practice on their shoe, I also like to use shoelaces that are stiffer. See how when I make a bunny loop like this, it doesn't flop over? That's going to make it easier for a child to learn how to tie their shoes. All right, so I hope these tips are helpful to turn the hurry up and get dressed exclamations that you say from across the house to hearing your child scream, "I did it! I got dressed on my own." Learning Without Tears received the question, I love the idea of wet, dry, try, but I hate touching chalk. How can I still do this multisensory activity with my students despite my dislike of chalk and chalkboards? Well, you have come to the right place because as an occupational therapist, we work on things like tactile defensiveness. That's OT lingo for people who dislike touching certain items, including chalk. As an OT, there are a ton of different adaptations that we can use to help individuals to still engage in this activity. Now, before I go over some of my tips and strategies, let's first talk about what is WetDry Try. WetDry Try is using either a slate like this for capital letters and numbers or a double-line blackboard like this for lowercase letters and cursive. No matter which slate you're using, you're going to couple it with using a little Barbie sponge like this for wet, a little piece of paper towel like this that the child's going to crumple up for drying, and the child is going to be trying using chalk like this. And it's little, not because we're cheap, it's little to help facilitate and to work on the child's grip. So that is what we use for this activity. Now, why do I love it so much? Well, this activity appeals to children of all different learning styles. Visually, it's easy for the child to see and simple. Auditorily, the child's hearing consistent, child-friendly language to build their letters, as well as some of that auditory feedback of the chalk on the chalkboard. Tactily, the child is touching and manipulating chalk or a wet sponge. And kinesthetically, the child is engaging in large movements that are consistent to help form and sequence their letters and their numbers. Now, with that being said, I do understand that some people just don't like chalk or chalkboards. Let's talk about those people. You may be one of them who may say, I hate chalk. So what can I do if I hate chalk? Well, here's some simple hacks for you. First of all, it's as easy as this. Just wrap your chalk with some blue tape, and then you don't even have to touch the chalk. It stays just like this, and you hold the blue tape. Likewise, you could wrap your chalk with rubber bands, and then you just hold the rubber band. Or my favorite hack is to put a little pencil cap eraser, and what you have to do is make a little slit in the back so it fits nicely, and then You just have to hold that pencil cap eraser and not even touch the chalk. There's also that old-fashioned chalk holder, but that's going to be like that longer plastic device, and it's not going to be little and small to work on grip. Now you may be thinking, I hate the sound of the chalk screeching on the chalkboard. What can you do? Well, take a little cup of water and your chalk and dip your chalk in water. Don't drown it, just dip it. And when you dip it in water and it's a little moist, there's going to be less of that auditory feedback when that chalk hits the slate. Likewise, if you are a person who hates chalk dust, dipping it in water is going to help as well. And you can also purchase dust-free chalk. So now let's talk about some adaptations. If you really dislike the activity of WetDry Try on the slate. The first thing I want to show you is our app by Learning Without Tears.
Handwriting without tears. Welcome to WetDry Try. Tap the game you'd like to play.
All right, I'm going to tap capital letter.
Pick and practice.
And let's practice this with the capital D.
Let's try the letter D. First, watch me write the letter. D starts in the starting corner. Big line down. Frog jump. Big curve to the bottom. Now, wet the letter with a sponge.
So then, all we got to do is use our pointer finger. That's a good tip, to use your pointer finger to point at that sponge and trace.
Very good. Oh, yeah. Now dry the letter with the towel.
All right, so then the next step, I would go and I would dry
Excellent.
the letter with the fake paper towel. And finally...
Good. Now try the letter with the chalk.
I get to try it with the chalk. I don't have to touch it, right? I'm just using this chalk on my slate.
Cool beans.
Not the real life chalk.
You got it right.
All right.
Nice job. You've earned a star.
Yay! Now, that app is wonderful. Do you see how there's that child-friendly language? There's positive reinforcement. It doesn't replace the actual use of the chalk, but if the child you're working with or you are that defensive to chalk, this is a great activity to supplement. You may still be thinking, I still don't like those sounds, the sound effects. So let me give you a hint. All you have to do is go back over to the main page and then click the settings, click the name, and then here there's a toggle, and I could toggle the sound effects off and save it, and that's going to take that sound effects off of the app. All right, so that's one idea. Another idea is to adapt a whiteboard. Okay, so if you really can't stand a slate chalkboard, then take a whiteboard and you can adapt it, and you could use dry erase. I would recommend dry erase crayons. Those are preferable over dry erase markers. Why? Because with dry erase crayons, I could break them till they're little in size. And it also provides the child with more feedback when they're dragging that crayon for force and gradation versus a slippery, slidey dry erase marker. And then to dry the dry erase crayon, you could also use one of our little Barbie sponges, whether it's a dry one or a wet one, okay? If you're having a really hard time getting that crayon off, you can cut a magic eraser to about this size and use a magic eraser for that wet portion. And for the dry portion, you could use your finger. All right. Another idea that I have is if you just don't like the touch of chalk, but you're okay with the chalkboard, there are tons of adaptations available where you could swap out that chalk for chalkboard specific colored pencils, chalkboard specific crayons, which of course are going to be my favorite because we can make them small, or chalkboard markers. Lastly, if this is just the tip of the iceberg and you're realizing that you have tactile defensiveness with a lot of different tactile mediums, well, it's time to call an occupational therapist. And OT can help you with giving you strategies such as deep pressure or firm pressure, some proprioception, some heavy work opportunities, or something like a weighted blanket that you could use either before and or during an activity like WetDry Try, in which you may not like chalk. So go ahead and give these ideas a try and let us know what you think in the comment section on our social media. A question came in from a parent stating, I have a 4.5-year-old who is writing and drawing with both left and right hands. We've given him years of opportunity to practice which hand he prefers, but he is still using both hands equally. Now what? All right, let's talk all about hand dominance. What is hand dominance? Hand dominance is using the preferred hand for fine motor activities such as handwriting or coloring or cutting. Hand dominance develops sometime between 2 and 4 years old, but it can take as long as up to 6 years old for true hand dominance to be established. So if a child is struggling with hand dominance, oftentimes I hear parents or caregivers say, my child is ambidextrous. Well, what is ambidexterity? It's when you use both your right and your left hand equally well and competently. For a child though, and in general, ambidextrous individuals is actually not very common, but rather the child may be interchanging their hands for another reason. Okay, and what can be that other reason? Well, there's two different reasons why a child may be struggling with hand dominance. Number one is the child has decreased fine motor strength. So they start coloring with one hand and then that hand gets tired. So they switch their crayon to the other and they continue to color. The other difficulty a child may have is crossing their body's midline. Okay, so that means that if you have a preferred object for that child and it's on their right side, they're going to use their right hand to grab that object. And likewise, if it's on the left side, they're going to use their left hand to grab it. They're not going to cross their body midline to pick up that object. All right, so now let's talk about how to help a child who is struggling with hand dominance. First of all, do not force hand dominance. Rather, offer plenty of different opportunities while that child is playing or at the tabletop doing tasks to use both hands equally in order to determine which hand appears to be dominant. When the child is doing work, observe which hand is the doer hand, so which hand is actually doing the activity, and which hand is the helper hand, and stabilizing the object. One of my best tips for you is to make sure that you always place everything at that child's midline, at their belly button. Why? Well, when that preferred object, like a little car, is at that midline, at their belly button, the child could pick which hand to pick it up with. Just like crayons, put it at their midline, the child can pick which hand they're going to pick it up with. You could do the same thing with snacks or their cup of water. Put it at their body's midline and observe which hand that child is going to pick up that utensil or that cup. And while they are doing all of these different activities, well, this is a great time to do a tally mark moment. Data collection. Super easy. All you have to do is make a quick little tally every time you initially see the child pick up an object either with their left or their right hand. This is going to give you information as to which hand is dominant. You could even ask a teacher at school to also partake in tally mark moments. Any other tips? Absolutely. If you have a child who likes to grab things, tell them to put their hands behind their back. And when their hands are behind their back, then offer them the object, and the child could choose which hand to grab it with. In the kitchen, there are plenty of different opportunities while your child helps you in the kitchen to stir, to pour. Watch which hand is dominant, which hand is doing the work, and which hand is stabilizing, the helper hand, which will be the non-dominant hand. I will caution you that sometimes you may see a child like my child when he was about 3 years old. He was always holding his spoon in his left hand. And my mom said to me, I think he's going to be a lefty. And I said, why? She said, because he always holds his spoon in his left hand. I said, that's true. But which hand is he shoveling the food into his mouth with? His right. So my child ended up being a righty. But you have to have that good eye, right? To decide which hand is going to be dominant. Another great activity is using Learning Without Tears wood pieces. There's a really fun song called Tap, Tap, Tap. And with tap, 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 the child can tap the wood pieces. I want you to observe which hand is doing the tapping. Most likely, that's going to be the child's dominant hand. You could also watch the child during ball games. Which hand does the child throw with? Which foot does the child kick with? But remember, be cautious because sometimes lefties are going to use their right hand or their right foot in ball games. You could also play pretend games like, okay, let's pretend to brush our hair or brush our teeth. The reason why it's pretend and I'm not having the child actually using a hairbrush or a toothbrush is because the child doesn't have to practice how to hold that actual tool, but rather just pretend to brush their teeth or brush their hair. You can play puppets with children and see which hand that child's holding that puppet with as they're playing. And then also construction. Watch when the child is building. When they're building with blocks or when they're building with things like Legos, you can see which hand the child is using for the Lego to press it together. That most likely is going to be their dominant hand. Just remember, it takes several weeks to really figure out which hand is dominant, and it can take a long time. So don't rush it. Remember that development, it can take up to 6 years to figure out which hand is truly dominant. But don't forget, everything at that child's midlines, tally mark moments, and plenty of opportunities to use both hands. Why? Because when it's time to help a child to hold their crayon correctly and write their letters, it's important that we are encouraging the child to use their dominant hand. Because if the child uses both hands, that skill of handwriting is going to be split amongst the right and the left hand.